Brothers and sisters, comrades, friends, wassalamu alaikum, peace be with all of you. Let me begin with a couple of apologies, if I may. The first is for leaving so swiftly after arriving. I have to meet with some members of Parliament, and then I have to write my weekly newspaper column, and then I have to sleep, although I'm actually half asleep already, because I've already done my 3-hour live radio show this morning on top of the huge rally that we had last night and the 17 media interviews that I've done in the last 48 hours in New Zealand. It's been action-packed, so I hope you'll forgive me. And the second is associated with that. I kind of gave you my best shot last night. I hope that that will largely suffice to motivate you in the rest of the proceedings today, because, as I say, I'm running out of steam. I hope you'll forgive me for that. The first thing I want to do is touch on the first of the issues, which is what is Islamophobia? How do you recognize it? I think the first thing that you have to bear in mind is this, that although there are some rich Muslims, and although there are some some white Muslims, the overwhelming majority of Muslims are neither white nor rich. And that's why we say that Islamophobia is really racism against Muslims. Indeed, the gutter snipes, the Elmer Gantries, the frauds that are spreading this Islamophobia this weekend in New Zealand, some of whom I understand are in the room to hear me say this, so let me underscore it. The frauds, the Elmer Gantries, the snake oil salesmen who have come here to spread this hatred against Islam are racists. And I look forward to the writ for libel if they'd like to serve it. They are racists who are seeking to whip up hatred amongst white people against non-white people. That's the game that they're in. It's nothing to do with religion. There's nothing Christian about spreading hatred against other people because of what they are. Indeed, it is to blaspheme against the very life and teachings of Jesus Christ. It's to blaspheme against the very idea of God, who made all human beings, of all colors, in all parts of this earth, to be engaged in the hate campaign that these people are engaged in. So when you see it, when you hear it, when you read it, recognize it for what it is. It is a vile poison that these people have embarked upon injecting into the body politic of this harmonious land of New Zealand, whose reputation around the world for having built a multiracial, multi-ethnic society in which hate is not the prevalent emotion stalking the land, that these people are wicked, wicked in a very religious sense. I'd go so far as to say, as a religious person myself, that far from being Christians, these people are positively satanic, and the devil is working through them in this hate campaign on which they are embarked. It will take many forms, of course. They will not say, we're from the Ku Klux Klan and we've come here to whip up white people's feelings against non-white people, even though the organization they most closely resemble is the Ku Klux Klan. They're not here with hoods over their heads today, but that's just because they're not embarrassed, because they're unembarrassable. They will say that they're against Islam because it's growing, because it's winning converts to its theology, as if all religions were not engaged in trying to win converts, as if all religions were not engaged on trying to win people to their banner. They'll say that it's because Islam, in their twisted view, has a view of women as second-class citizens, as if the dominant Western mode has reached the acme of perfection in relations between men and women, as if women were treated well over the centuries in predominantly white and Christian models, as if women were not second-class citizens in every society, as if the sexualization of women, the reduction of women to sexual objects and servants of men was not the dominant mode in our society, which every thinking person, of course, knows that it is. They will say that they don't like what they perceive to be the attitude of Islam and Muslims towards gays, as if these snake oil salesmen loved gays, as if they were in the front ranks of championing the equal rights of gay people, when in fact they're the most bigoted and prejudiced people in the land, in every land, these Christian fundamentalists. They will say that they're not against Islam because of the people who profess it, but because of some twisted reading of the Quran, which none of them can read. None of them can read Arabic. None of them know anything about the Quran that they describe. If they did, they wouldn't be pumping out the lies about it that they habitually do. The truth is this: Islam is a peaceful religion. Islam proclaims that there can be no compulsion in religion, that no one can be forced to believe in God, because if they were forced, they wouldn't believe in God, which would be a contradiction in the basic tenets of Islam. So look for these signs and combat them with the truth. Tell people that these men, for they are predominantly men, care nothing about the rights of women, care nothing about the rights of minorities. They care nothing about the real truths that lie at the heart of the great religion of Islam, which has 1.8 billion adherents across the globe. And apart from anything else, practically speaking, it's not a good idea to declare war against 1.8 billion people. It's not a great idea to try to divide a world of only 7 billion on the earth into 1.8 billion people being beyond the pale, that we can't reason with, that we can't live with as neighbors on this earth, in this country, this beautiful country of yours. So look out for the telltale propaganda, which I think you'll recognize without having to define it, and smoke out the truth behind it and tell people the truth behind it. Which leads me to the second of the two issues that you're going to be discussing in your workshops, and that is, what is to be done about this? Well, the first thing is to call a spade a spade. Call these people the racists and liars that they are, and link up with every right-thinking person in these islands that you can. Network with every right-thinking person that you can find. Tell the truth as the best antidote to their lies. Build networks. Support the networks that are already there. Make sure you're all in touch with each other. Form a body of informed opinion that can rebut lies whenever you see them. The next time you see an item in the paper from one of these jokers, answer it with readers' letters, with protests to the editor. with complaints through whatever regulatory framework you have here in New Zealand to try and police the way in which minorities can be gratuitously offended. I believe that in our country, the long struggle to win legislative change to include incitement to religious hatred, as well as incitement to race hatred, should be one of your goals. You know, these men who are sitting here in this room, who are involved in these rapturous hate fests, if they were saying what they say about blacks or about Jews, they'd be prosecuted, because blacks and Jews are treated under the law as races who cannot be gratuitously insulted and traduced in this way. But because Islam is not defined as a race, though how Jews can be a race and Muslims not is an intellectual exercise worth exploring, because Muslims are not defined in your law as a race, they can be subjected to these kind of liars with all their hate. And I don't think that that's right. And in Britain we've changed our law to make it a criminal offence to incite religious hatred, just the same as the incitement to racial hatred is a criminal offence. And I think that you should consider whether that is one of the things that you should be asking for. You may decide that that's not the best way to go, and clearly there are some arguments against amending the law in that regard. But I think the argument for including incitement to religious hatred wins that argument, and certainly has in our country. But laws alone will not do it. Only an informed population, an informed public, who understands the truth about Islam and about Muslims, and I've now met a very large number of New Zealand's Muslims in just the last 3 days, and I never met a more respectable, a more reasonable, a more rational group of people anywhere at any time. The people I've met from New Zealand's Muslim community are not a threat to anybody. As the academic, the United States academic who spoke at our great rally last night made clear, if you were involved in a risk assessment project, if you were in the intelligence services and you were working out what the threat to New Zealand is from its Muslims, you would conclude that there's more chance of Mount Eden re-erupting than that the Muslims in New Zealand should be a danger or a threat to anyone in these islands. And that's the message that you have to spread throughout the right-thinking people of New Zealand. And I believe you can best do that by supporting groups like the Working Together group, like RAM, like the other organizations that are sponsoring these events over these last 3 days. So make sure that you become not a passive recipient of good speeches, but that you become a galvanized activist in this cause as a result of the speeches that you have heard. I really don't have anything more to say. I hope I've made sense. I don't remember even what I said a minute ago. And my last message is this. These men personify wickedness. Wickedness will never triumph on the earth, because God is great, and God will always open people's hearts to the truth. I ask you to spread the truth as the best antidote to their lives. Wassalamu alaikum. Thank you very much. The first thing I want to do is touch on the first of the issues, which is what is Islamophobia? How do you recognize it? I think the first thing that you have to bear in mind is this, that although there are some rich Muslims, and although there are some some white Muslims, the overwhelming majority of Muslims are neither white nor rich. And that's why we say that Islamophobia is really racism against Muslims. Indeed, packed, so I hope you'll forgive me. And the second is associated with that. I kind of gave you my best shot last night. I hope that that will largely suffice to motivate you in the rest of the proceedings today, because, as I say, I'm running out of steam. I hope you'll forgive me for that. Actually, half asleep already, because I've already done my 3-hour live radio show this morning on top of the huge rally that we had last night and the 17 media interviews that I've done in the last 48 hours in New Zealand. It's been action. Brothers and sisters, comrades, friends, wassalamu alaikum, peace be with all of you. Let me begin with a couple of apologies, if I may. The first is for leaving so swiftly after arriving. I have to meet with some members of Parliament, and then I have to write my weekly newspaper column, and then I have to sleep, although I'm